everyone, welcome back to Movies TV Mad. I'm Mick, your host with the most to start your girlfriends and your wives. Let's talk about James Gunn. He is the king, the prince. He's in charge of DC live action, whether we like it or not. And you know, I have a balanced kind of a view on that. There's parts of James that makes me really happy that he's running DC Studios, the creative arm of DC Studios. There's certain elements about James that kind of make me say, red flag, is he going to pull this off? Because nobody knows at this moment in time. Like something like Creature Commandos, that's James Gunn. And we've discussed that before. I don't really have any doubts about James doing that. But you know what? It's very interesting about James because a lot of people think he's a generic filmmaker. If you go on to Threads where he's very active and a lot of his fans are there and you see some of the things they say when they tag him, it's like they've never seen a James Gunn film before. James Gunn doesn't make generic, happy, clappy movies. I know a lot of you think that he does. There's a lot of depth and darkness in his movies because Zack Snyder's been called out for, making Superman too dark and all this. And that's another debate for another time, whether Man of Steel was a dark movie, whether BVS was too dark, blah. Today, we're talking about Mr. James Gunn. So, if you think about James Gunn, you think about Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, which a lot of his fans and a lot of pundits didn't like as much as the first and third movie. But the second movie was very good. It still had the fun and the comedy that you get with James Gunn films and comic book movies. But that moment when Peter is having the standoff against Ego is a very dark moment. He's in control of Peter. This is Peter's father and he's a very bad guy. And so that's very dark as well. And is there anything more darker than, Christopher Smith, aka Peacemaker, murdering Rick Flag? Or when he's about to kill Ratcatcher 2. The arc in Peacemaker with his father, played by Robert Patrick, is a really brutal, dark, horrible, bigoted, racist person. And you kind of start to understand why Peacemaker is the way he is. But he's nowhere near as bad as that guy. And, you start to realize this guy actually, he's got some good qualities. He wants to make friends. He's a bit of a beggar friend. He wants, it's difficult for him to connect with people because he's never been taught how. But then you find out how his brother died because he fought him as a small boy. He was forced to. And so there's a lot of dark depth in James Gunn films. And the one streaming show we've seen that he's done thus far. So I don't know where this generic kind of colourful, kind of playful stuff has come from, but I've not seen James Gunn do that. What about in the Suicide Squad when you've got an animal, a creature, an alien, killing the very human being that enacted cruelty on him? The character that Peter Capaldi played, by killing him. So James Gunn's a lover of animals, right? And so James has a lot of depth in his movies. And for the people who want his DCU to fail, who want his Superman movie to fail, I think you may be disappointed because his record speaks for itself. You've got to forget the fact that the Suicide Squad, flopped at the box office. It was day and date. It was during the pandemic. It's not cope. It's not an excuse. It's fact at the end of the day. I think you're going to be disappointed because forget about box office. Forget about the fact that he's never made $1 billion movie. Still, his movies have made good money. Guardians Volume 1 made good money. Guardians Volume 2 made good solid money. And Guardians Volume 3 isn't that near on $900 million it made? The final, the conclusion to his Guardians of the Galaxy story. So, audiences like James Gunn movies. There's no question. And there is an element of thought-provoking storytelling with James Gunn. He just puts it in a kind of more brighter angle, but it's there if you look for it. So it's going to be very interesting what he does with his Superman movie. But Superman is difficult to get right, as we all know. In reality, the only Superman movie to make the kind of money a studio has ever been pleased with is Superman 78. I mean, it broke records back in the day, and I mean, if you translate the figures for today's money, it made over $1 billion. A proper successful movie that everybody loved. Superman 2 still made good money, not the money the first one made. I mean, the first one back in the day made nearly 400 million, which was brilliant back then, by the way. It's not like there's no 3D, there was no IMAX, there was fewer cinemas. It was very good money. Don't get it twisted. But we've had that discussion before. There's no point debating that. That's a fact. Superman 2 made solid money. Superman 3 made $100 million. Again, back then, that was pretty good. Superman 4, it's not worth discussing. The budget was withdrawn, but I still think there's great moments within that movie. But it was a flop, obviously. Superman Returns made about, I think, just under 400 million. Not enough, nowhere near enough. That movie cost near on 250 million, maybe 300 million. It was a very expensive movie, and some fans have asked, where did the money go? Well, I'll tell you where the money went. It went on the Return to Krypton sequence, which, if you watch that, was a very expensive, stunning sequence. And I'll say to this day, still should have been in that movie. It's probably the best deleted scene I have ever seen to this day. And why it was deleted, I will never understand. But Superman Returns is a movie that I hold close to my heart, but I can kind of understand why it wasn't successful. So it broke even, it got its money back. I suppose, arguably, Superman Returns was a flop. Man of Steel was not a flop. Near on 700 million. It has its fans, but it divided DC fans for sure. BVS went even deeper in dividing DC fans, but it wasn't a flop. Man of Steel and BVS just didn't make the money the studio wanted, but they made, okay, solid money. They're not flops, those movies. But it's going to be interesting now because Zack Snyder is in an interesting position now because he gets to sit back next July with his cigar. I don't think he smokes cigars anyway, and he'll be under no pressure. There's a great pressure in making a Superman film. And forget James Gunn's calm exterior. Everyone at WB, everyone at DC Studios, especially James, will be very, very nervous because Superman has James's name all over it. And it would be interesting to know how much freedom James actually has at DC Studios, if there is interference there, or if he's allowed to do whatever he wants to make. You know, did he have the freedom to make the Superman film he wanted to? These things come out in the wash. I think if the film's successful, nobody really cares about creative freedom. But what happens is when a movie fails, as we saw with Todd Phillips and the stuff that came out about Joker Folie et Deux, the information about him not wanting James Gunn's input, not wanting DC Studios' input, and only wanting to work with Adby and DeLuca wasn't a surprise to me. I told you about that. And really, James Gunn didn't really need to have anything to do with Joker Folie et Deux. James Gunn and Peter Safran's remit should be the stuff, the new stuff, the new era stuff they're making. And they shouldn't be really interfering with the other movies. I disagree that James Gunn said he did give notes and some suggestions for the Penguin. Again, nothing to do with you. I know it's a DC Studios thing. I know it's got its logo on there, but focus on your own stuff. You know you can trust Matt Reeves and Lauren LaFranc to make a great TV show, and they have. So they didn't need your input, mate, in the first place. So that kind of weirded me out. So, when a Superman film is made, and we're getting closer and closer to July, everyone's going to have an opinion about a Superman movie, a Bond movie, a Jason Bourne movie, whatever it is. When these are iconic characters like Superman, it's not just easy to make a film and in a way get away with it. People are going to be looking at this film with a fine-tooth comb. And if there's something people don't like, they're going to say so. And that doesn't necessarily mean it will hurt the box office or it will be a problem, but it's very difficult to make, a successful Superman movie. I think generally, general audiences will give it a chance. Of course, what's come into question now is, is this a film that has hype behind it? What is the interest behind this movie? Are people genuinely interested in this film? One of the lessons that I learned during the hype for the Flash movie, because it was interesting at the time, the CinemaCon situation, it's a great movie, James saying it's the best movie, one of the best movies in the Ginia. Everyone was feeding us BS about that movie, but it did seem, I started to believe in it. I actually did believe that Tom Cruise liked the movie, but clearly, and I'm going to say this, in my opinion, this is the opinion here at Movies TV Mad, because I'm Movies TV Mad, that was BS, because they were desperate to make money. And the kind of reports we're hearing, an insider said, Superman, James Gunn's Superman is an amazing film, we're hearing good things, you've got to pay no attention to that. That's just the desperation. There's no, I don't know. I don't know what this film's going to be. We don't even know what it's really about. We kind of know a few things, but that's it really. So you've got to take that as nothing. One of the things we're going to find out in July, actually we're going to find out before July, when the ticket sales start going on sale, it'll be very interesting. But what will give you a clue if the hype for this movie is real, and I said this the other day, is the views for the trailer. When a movie is anticipated, the views are huge. When Deadpool and Wolverine had its first trailer, the views, I'm sure they broke viewing records, because it was a hugely anticipated movie. Same with Spider-Man, No Way Home, or an Avatar movie, or anything that's hugely anticipated. There should be huge views for the trailer. So the views for this Superman movie will be very interesting. For example, the Creature Commando trailer views are okay, they're solid, but they're not breaking any records. And that's not a surprise. It doesn't mean the people who will watch it aren't excited to see it, but I don't think generally people will be subscribing to Max to watch that show. It's not about Creature Commandos. Creature Commandos is a little thing. It's all about Superman. And they have already decided what kind of box office, obviously, they want. They know what they want. Do they want a solid box office? Do they want a huge box office? Of course, they'd love to make $1 billion to $2 billion, but we've got to be realistic here. I think, and I've said this before, we all know that WB don't have a lot of money. And I feel that this movie didn't cost a lot to make. And I'm talking about maybe 120 to 150 million, which isn't a lot, in today's standards. As we talked about, Man of Steel costs much more than that to make, and it just shows when you see it. Superman Returns, we've discussed the box office for that, but I think that James Gunn's Superman cost at least 100 million less to make, which means they have an avenue to take less money. That's why Man of Steel's 700 million, they would have wanted to make more than that. Or BVS would have been a very expensive movie to make, so they would have wanted to make more than that. And plus, they're bloody greedy as well. We know that. But it's interesting what is acceptable for this movie by the studio, because fans are going to tell you, yeah, it's got to take this or it's a failure. Obviously, Snyder fans will say, if it doesn't take $1 billion, it's a flop and things like that. I'm not necessarily sure, that this Superman movie, it's not Cope, has to take $1 billion. I'm not too sure, because I think, as I said, the budget for me ranges from 120 to 150 million. That's much cheaper than what Superman Returns cost to make, or Man of Steel. And, it doesn't matter what your opinion is, what kind of side of the fandom you're on, I'm giving it to you straight. That's what I think the budget to this movie is. And, there was these leaks about 400 million for Superman. Warner Brothers, I don't. When was the last time someone spent 400 million to make a fucking movie? You know, let's not talk shit here. So that's not true. The most this film would have cost if Warner Brothers were at their peak when they were spending big money on these kind of films, maybe a crazy 300 million, and that's stretching it. But I don't think this film is going to cost that kind of money. So I think there's an avenue to take less than $1 billion. So my belief is anything from, if they were to bring in, I think anything really from 700 million and above, I think they'd be very happy with 750, by the way. And I think anything from 750 and above, they would be very, very happy with, right? And obviously, if they were to get to $1 billion, they'd be jumping about, and James Gunn would have the freedom of Burbank, you know, so there's no question about that. But I think anything from 700 and above, they'll be very happy. Below that, I mean, look, as I say, would they be happy with 6? I don't think so. They certainly wouldn't be happy with 500. This film has to make a certain amount of money. And it'd be interesting, as I say, they clearly, Zaslav and everyone at WB has a lowest figure they'll be happy with for this movie to take. I think 650 would be acceptable. Not good, but would be acceptable to them. But obviously everyone's going to call that a flop. So I think anything between 700 million and above will be very good for them. Now let's not forget that Man of Steel made near on in 700 million. I think about 650, or 670? No, not far away from 700 million. So, and people will say, well, why wasn't that acceptable for Man of Steel? Well, because we live in different times, because Warner Brothers are, one of the things is that the people making these films and Warner Brothers are on the same page. But obviously they want to make money. And as I say, one of the reasons that it's more acceptable for this film to take 700 million, because it was cheaper to make. That's my belief. And, you know, there's no point us asking James Gunn how much money this movie cost to make. He's not going to tell us. And James is very, very receptive about that. So I think anything from 700 million is acceptable. And right now you're shouting at me via whatever device you're watching me on if you've stuck with me for this long. And if you have, thank you very much. Hope you've shared. Hope you've pressed like. And I hope that you've commented down below. But yeah, I think it's not necessarily a demand for this movie. I don't think it's $1 billion or else. I think at the beginning of this process, I was saying, you know, a Superman film's got to take $1 billion, blah, 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 blah. I'm kind of lowering my expectations because of what's happened to the studio. The studio is on its knees, you know. So as long as they're on a plus, as long as they're on a good profit, and I think because this film cost no more than 150 million to make, as I say, that's not a lot. And 150 is the upper scales. I don't even think this film cost 150 million. Now they're claiming that Joker Folie en Noir cost 200 to 300 million with marketing. If that's the case, I don't know where that money went. So that's certainly not the case. That's certainly not the case for Superman. As I say, I think it's it's going to be the cheapest Superman film ever made, I think, since Superman 4, The Quest for Peace, which barely had a budget, so it'd be interesting. But I think they would have given him the money he needed to make this film. And it will be interesting what kind of film that we see. And the trailer will be very important to see how much money was spent on it as well. But James Gunn is very efficient with VFX. I've never seen a bad VFX shot by James Gunn. I think, as I say, he's very efficient. He's very proud. He has pride in what he makes. Nothing gets rushed. You know, everything's planned. You know, and as he said, you know, they've given themselves a year for post-production, which is very, very important. So post-production will continue. It won't just be finished. Some fans are going, oh yeah, the post will be finished soon. No. Post carries on and carries on to the last minute. They'll perfect everything. I mean, some of the VFX we've seen at Marvel hasn't been great because they've got so much things to do. The streaming, you know, the beauty right now for WB and DC Studios is they're not rushing. They're not a conveyor belt. You know, the Penguin show wouldn't have had any proper VFX, so that would have been made the old-fashioned way. So you're not draining the pool, if you like. So my opinion about James Gunn as a filmmaker is, as I've always said, he's a very efficient, good writer-director. But you know what you're going to get from a James Gunn movie. But I do feel that this Superman movie will be slightly different than his normal cooking. And I think there will be quite a few surprises in this film. And DCU is going to be an interesting franchise because he can't do everything. I think if he could do everything, he would, but I don't think that would be good. You want different voices, and James knows that. It's like making a TV series. You have different writers, and that's what a franchise is. And so, away from the voices, away from the shills, away from the simps, away from the Snyder fans who despise James, all that, forget all that noise. We're not about that noise here. And there's certain situations, I do follow Aaron Fisher, who is a Snyder fan, who is a content creator who does daily videos, gives you DC updates. I think he's good at what he does. I think sometimes he ruins it for himself. He enjoys the controversy. He enjoys winding up, opposition DC fans. And for me, I'm a DC live action fan. I've been watching DC TV since Batman 66 as a small boy. I don't have my foot in a corner. I love what Zack did. I do love James Gunn's CBMs. I probably prefer kind of what Zack does, but I do love James Gunn's stuff. I'm not a James Gunn hater, but I always say the way it is with James, and I react to each thing, and I think that's important. So right now, I think my only criticisms mostly are for Lanterns. I mean, it's very interesting. I was rewatching 2011's Green Lantern movie, actually a movie that I loved. And I hate the fact that Ryan Reynolds keeps on shitting on it, by the way, because I love it. And it wasn't perfect, but you've got to understand when it was made, it was a hugely experimental movie. The CGI was experimental. It's very difficult to put Green Lantern in live action. It's a huge universe. And I actually think, in terms of the galactic cosmic side of that movie, they pulled it off. I love the stuff on OR. I've said it before. I love the stuff in space. I love Hal Jordan training with the other Lanterns. I loved Sinestro. I love the fact that Parallax was a big thing in it as well. I thought the villain was solid. Dr. Amanda Waller, which is an interesting thing as well. I'm not sure if she is a kind of a scientist in some versions of the comics. Maybe she is. So that, and it had an all-star cast. Tim Robbins, for crying out loud. I mean, it did have a good cast. I think Ryan Reynolds did the best that he could do. Look, the costumes should never have been CGI. They made a mistake, and people really hung them by that. That film made near on 400 million, which wasn't bad, but that film was so expensive, and you can't green light it when it doesn't make enough money. I don't think there wasn't an appetite for a Green Lantern movie. Do I think James Gunn's, as I've said, obviously, I'm not happy that we're doing a cheap kind of Lanterns detective story. But what I will say is, maybe it's a good thing to test the waters with the Green Lantern core universe at first and see where we're at. You see, at the end of the day, I can react negative to Lanterns and say, we deserve a huge epic movie, and we do. But maybe he wants to tread carefully. And also, as I've said, the studio doesn't have the money. That is the situation. So it'll be interesting if you can tell when you're watching this stuff that it's cheaply done. Now, James Gunn kind of constructed the concept for Lanterns, but he didn't do the story. They've got Damon Lindelof and his team there as well. Tom King is a big part of DCU, which is interesting as well. And so we will see how all this pans out. But of course, the most important thing right now isn't even Creature Commandos. That would have solid views on HBO Max or Max, as how they're calling it now. Why don't you just put Warner Brothers on that streaming service? Call it Warner Brothers Plus. I don't care. You are a bunch of idiots. Anyway, so Creature Commandos, which I'm looking forward to, by the way, it's the first entry point to the DCU, but the real test, we all know it, is Superman. And Aaron Fisher, I was watching his video last night saying, I don't think, he's saying he doesn't think Superman's going to make money. You don't want it to make money. Doesn't mean it won't make money. Nobody knows. Nobody knows what this movie is. But as I said earlier, what we do know is that the general audience like James Gunn movies. If you check the Rotten Tomatoes audience scores and critic scores for the Suicide Squad or Guardians 1 and 3, Guardians 2 did have a mixed response because it was a darker movie. Now, I liked it because of that. I like darkness and depth in my stories. I don't want things too light and funny, but I love the first Guardians. It's got a good story. The characters are developed well. It's a lot of fun, but there are dark moments in that film as well. It does everything. I don't necessarily think that this Superman film will be typical James Gunn, but it will have traits of his personality and his usual storytelling styles. I've got a kind of in my mind an idea what this is going to be. Most of it does kind of excite me. I do have some concerns. I do have worries. We will see if those worries come to fruition. But it's a very interesting situation. He's come from Marvel where things are done a certain way. And I'm talking peak Marvel with the post-credit scenes and all of that. So at this moment in time, if you're asking me, am I confident about the DCU? Am I confident about Superman? I wouldn't say, I'm not going to say confident. I think that would be the wrong description for me. I'm in the middle. I'm sitting on the fence right now. I have no effing idea how this is going to work out. I don't know if it's going to be successful. I don't know if it's not going to be successful. That's the thing. Everyone is going to tell you what they think. Everyone's going to make a prediction. And I can make a prediction. It's not because I'm scared to make a prediction because I could be proved wrong. I don't mind being wrong. That's fine. We live in an era today where people are scared of being wrong, and even when they are wrong, fight and say they were right. I don't do that. I'm happy to be wrong. That's why, you've got to be brave when you make content, right? I'm not sitting on the fence for sitting on the fence's sake. And normally, you know me, I'm very, I'll go here, I'll go there with my opinions. But the truth is, I simply don't know if the DCU is going to be successful or not. There's so many different elements that could go either way. I think if James Gunn is allowed to cook, it probably will do okay. If he's being controlled and if the studio are obsessed with a bright, optimistic movie with lots of giggles and jokes and smiles, it's not going to work out. Because even the people who hated the Snyderverse for being dark ain't going to appreciate that. And I think there's no question about it. The film that James Gunn's Superman is going to be compared to is Man of Steel. It's going to be very, very interesting. Man of Steel is a very contemporary take on Superman, which doesn't necessarily focus on character so much. It focuses on the events around Superman, but you do get flashbacks. You do see the challenges of what it was like to be a young Clark. It's interesting. They don't really spend much time on the kind of Lois and Clark relationship. It's there. It's developed really quickly. There's a bond forming, but they don't spend the time on it. And that's been a criticism by many people. And by BVS, they're already living together, I think. So I think they are, yeah. So it's a different way of going at the same material, and there's nothing wrong with that. So it's going to be very interesting how he's gone at this, what kind of film it's going to be. Interestingly, if you think about Guardians Volume 3, where Gamora and Peter go their own separate ways and that romance doesn't work out, that's an interesting thing to look at. And yesterday I had my little theory, maybe it's Wonder Woman and Superman having a romance and not Lois and Superman, which would be a highly controversial thing to do. We will see. So the DCU and Superman right now is an unknown quantity. In a lot of ways, James Gunn is an unknown quantity in what he's doing. He's criticised the industry before, speaking about, movies from 30 years ago being much better than they are today. So he gets it. He gets it. But he's not movie Jesus, right? He's not, he's not a Coppola. He's not a Martin Scorsese, but he's good at what he does. And we're just going to have to be patient to see what he actually does do.